Thank you for making me a bunch of money. I really appreciate you, Trey.
That's my job. I think if you don't think of a lawyer that way, you think of a lawyer as a strategic advisor, especially like a good lawyer, as someone who can provide business advice in addition to the legal advice. You're going to kind of create more value for your company.
Holy shit, if I get this wrong, it's like 20% extra tax. Like, Trey, help me here.
It's huge. Yeah, it's huge if it happens.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Oh boy, start your M&A engines. Welcome back to Run the Numbers, where we talk with finance and business leaders about the decisions, dilemmas, and occasional chaos behind major transactions. So today's guest is Trey O'Callaghan, a partner in the M&A practice at Goodwin and Proctor, one of the top law firms out there. Trey started out handling deals across industrial sectors, everything from oil rigs to cold storage, and he now focuses specifically on tech M&A and venture-backed companies. And full disclosure, Trey was my lawyer when I was the CFO of Parts Tech, helping lead our sale to a strategic acquirer. And through that process, he was equal parts legal counsel and my psychiatrist, which if you've been through a deal, you know that is no exaggeration. So in this episode, we go deep. We talk about the best time to bring in an M&A lawyer and why waiting too long can cost you more than just legal fees, what goes into negotiating the engagement letter with your banker, and why your lawyer should absolutely be in the room for that, real life deal disasters from bad banker pairings to earnout disputes that could have been avoided with better prep, why earnouts are a magnet for litigation, how CFOs can protect themselves, and what financial metrics are most likely to become battlegrounds, and what non-founder execs should be thinking about when their company is being sold, comp, contracts, non-compete, and all the important questions, including like, am I staying or am I getting fired here? Whether you're nearing a deal or just want to better understand how value gets negotiated and occasionally lost, this episode is packed with lessons from the legal front lines. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. This episode of Run the Numbers is brought to you by Navan, the all-in-one travel and expense solution. CFOs and finance leaders, let's be honest here. Your T&E process is broken. Manual reconciliations waste valuable time, policy violations drain money, and limited visibility creates unnecessary risk. Nobody likes that. Navan cuts through these problems, giving finance teams the clarity and control needed to close with confidence, faster and with fewer headaches. Connect your existing eligible Visa, MasterCard, or American Express cards directly to Navan and keep all your card rewards and banking relationships. Get real-time expense tracking, automated policy enforcement, and AI-powered reconciliation that works. Companies like Anthropic, Unilever, and Zoom trust Navan to manage travel spend smarter and increase compliance. Are you ready to modernize your T&E process? Visit navan.com/runthenumbers for your demo today. That's navan.com/runthenumbers. Tell them CJ sent you. They'll hook you up. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. Bull market, bear market. Rates will rise, rates will fall. Can someone please just invent a crystal ball already? Until then, over 40,000 businesses have future-proofed their companies with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. Whether you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. If you listen to this podcast, you'll know I ask CFOs all the time to rep their tech stacks, and I would say almost every one of them use NetSuite. And that's what I would use too. Whether you're a company earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/metrics. The guide is free to you. That is netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, it's netsuite.com/metrics. Please, guys, I really need this. As a CFO, you're expected to bring clarity to everything, including how your company manages ownership. The tools you use should make that easier, not harder. But when they come with hidden fees, data you can't always trust, and support you can't rely on, you end up with more frustration than clarity. That's where Pulley comes in. Pulley is the cap table management platform built for finance leaders who need accurate, decision-ready data from a system that works for your business, not against it. With Pulley, you get intuitive workflows, audit-ready reporting, and support you can count on, all backed by predictable pricing you can plan around, so you can stay compliant and make smarter decisions about your company's future. Manage everything from fundraise modeling to ASC 718 reporting to custom liquidity programs, all on one trusted platform. Hundreds of high-growth companies like Linear, Fathom, and Runway trust Pulley to help turn ownership into a strategic advantage. And joining them is now easier than ever. You can switch to Pulley in as little as 5 days. And for a limited time, they're offering 25% off your first year. To claim your exclusive offer, visit pulley.com/mostlymetrics. That is pulley.com/mostlymetrics. Pulley.com/mostlymetrics. Trey, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, CJ. Happy to be here.
And thank you for making me a bunch of money. I really appreciate you, Trey.
That's my job.
So listeners should have the benefit of knowing that me and Trey have worked together on a deal before. And Trey, you're like part lawyer, part psychologist.
I've been called a psychologist before. I like that. I mean, I do think that deals get heated. They get rough. I think at the end, everyone's really happy always. But we try to give good business advice, strategic advice, and maybe psychology as well.
You've probably seen me at my best and my worst. You and my wife have seen me at my best and my worst. But nonetheless, like I was really pumped to bring you on the pod because we went through this period of working together where it was stressful, it was high stakes. And like as a first time CFO, you look for advisors who can like level with you and see around corners that you haven't seen before. And I don't want to just like blow smoke up your ass, but like you're the best lawyer I've worked with, like ever. I've worked with. Don't tell your colleague Mike, but you're the best lawyer I've worked with so far. So is it cool if we jam out on selling a company and some M&A stuff today?
Yeah, let's do it.
Maybe just like some background here. And tell me if I'm wrong. Do you like to be called a lawyer, an attorney, a consigliere? Like what do you go by?
I mean, any nice word is fine with me. I've been called a lot of bad words before. So, lawyer works, attorney works. Probably most people say lawyer. Some people say there's a difference between a lawyer and attorney. I don't really think there is. Yeah. But I go by a lawyer usually.
And you're at Goodwin today.
At Goodwin today, yeah.
Maybe you could just give us the quick overview of like how you got there with the different types of law you worked on and then like what you specialize in now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my career at another big international law firm in a general M&A practice and was doing all types of deals like from PE, some tech, a lot of industrial deals. And towards the end of my time there, I was doing cold storage, I did slaughterhouse cleaning, oil rigs, like some of these industries that like nothing against that type of work, but I wanted something a little more dynamic. And I had a little bit of exposure to the tech world and thought that like, if I'm doing this long term, I need to be working in companies that I enjoy working with and working with clients that are kind of more like me. And so Goodwin is one of a few firms that has a tech specialty. And so it was one of the short firms on my list to transfer to. Been at Goodwin for I think over 4 years now, and now a partner at Goodwin, and practice focused on tech M&A as well as advising tech companies throughout their life cycle, as well as some PE, venture, and public companies that buy tech companies. And so I love the tech space. The first time I showed up to a meeting at Goodwin, I was wearing like kind of not like a suit, but a button-in shirt and slacks on. I walk in and people are like laughing at me. Everyone's in hoodies and sweatpants, and like it's a completely different vibe in the tech world than it was what I had before, and it's been a great experience.
Yeah, for those who are like going through the laundry list of different law firms that are out there, Goodwin's known as one of the top tech M&A law firms. Like if you had your druthers and you had to go into war with a firm, that would be one of them on the list. But I gotta pause you. Did you say you worked on deals for slaughterhouses before this?
I did like an industrial slaughterhouse. It was a conglomerate, and one of their businesses was like a slaughterhouse type line. And like, look, it's good deal. It was a huge deal. Like the people, nothing against that, right? It's
no, but it's like it's fascinating at the same time. Yeah. Like I think you also said oil rigs. People forget that like there's big money to be made around all sorts of different deals and litigation in any industry, even if you're, spraying the bologna and hot dogs off your boots at a slaughterhouse.
Oh yeah. I mean, like in some of the, I think, people who've done the best in this world, it's simple businesses that they run really, really well. And look, that's great. I think tech is interesting because almost every single one of my clients is creating something new that didn't exist before, where versus kind of taking an existing business and running it more efficiently. And being a part of kind of clients that are just like kind of world changing is I mean, look, sometimes software isn't world changing, right? It's just a new software that's interesting, but it's not, but it's a little more exciting than to me, at least, than what I was doing before.
Well, I sold a lot of brake pads. Trey, M&A is like kind of like a big term. It can be unpacked in a lot of ways. When should a company think about engaging with an M&A lawyer?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think earlier the better. And so a lot of people listening to the podcast probably are venture backed, and they've had law firms, throughout their various investment rounds. Yeah. And the law firms that you used before for your Series C and your Series A, it might be a great law firm for your M&A exit. It might not, depending on kind of how big a deal and who the acquirer is. But I think a mistake people make is thinking of lawyers as solely like a paper pusher that gets a deal over the line and not bringing the lawyer in early enough for the strategic and business advice. I really think at a minimum, you should hire a lawyer pre-banker engagement. Some people think that like your bank is the party that pushes the deal over the line and they're kind of setting everything up and the lawyer comes in later. But I really think you want your lawyer involved prior to the bank engagement, helping you not only navigate who to hire as a bank, but kind of looking ahead and seeing what type of legal issues could get in the way of a deal, and then advising you through the banker process into deal prep, and then eventually into LOI and deal execution.
That is so key, what you said about talking to someone earlier. And like I had the benefit of working with you on a fundraise before. So like we got like some working reps together. But like I think it's like really hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube on certain terms if you don't get to like scope it out with the lawyer beforehand. And like before signing a term sheet, like you should really float that past somebody to make sure it looks okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even back in your late stage financing rounds, like how you set those up can really affect how your M&A exit looks. How your banker engagement works will affect the economics of your M&A exit. Like issues that lawyers will tell you years before the deal will come back and haunt you in the deal if they're big enough type of issues that haven't been solved correctly. And so I think earlier the better. And I think really it's kind of a mindset. So a lot of people have the mindset that like a lawyer is kind of just the cost and to be minimized. Like you pick up the phone and you're gonna get nickel and dimed. And like I hope to not be that type of lawyer. And I know my colleagues feel the same way,
yeah.
But I think if you don't think of a lawyer that way, you think of a lawyer as a strategic advisor, especially like a good lawyer, as someone who can provide business advice in addition to the legal advice. You're going to kind of create more value for your company in the long run. And
back to like an engagement letter with a bank. So let's go even further back in the life cycle, like not even a term sheet from, an investor who wants to invest with you or the potential acquirer. Like that was key in my position, because you look at it, you're like, this engagement letter could be for 4%, selling price could be for 3%. It's like being like penny wise but pound foolish, not wanting to use a lawyer on that. That could be like massive dollars at the end of the day if you do it wrong.
Massive. And I mean, look, we have great relationships with a ton of banks. They add a ton of great value to the deal, right? So a good bank can mean it can be really, really helpful. A bad bank can really, really hurt your process. I've had like, and even at the engagement letter, a good bank might try to, exert a pound of money out of you without even realizing it, the way the engagement letter is set up. And so even a good bank might try to, the first draft of their engagement letters are probably going to have provisions in there that you don't want to live with. But I mean, I've had clients that like, I think maybe some advice if you're thinking about which bank to hire. Like first, your lawyers have seen all these banks before. And so we can provide, some of our own gut check advice. Even pricing, we keep like at Goodwin a database of banker pricing. And so we have a kind of a general idea of what to expect. Best way to get to know you're confident on pricing is to get multiple banks. Like don't fall in love with a banker too soon is advice we always tell our clients. Maybe something that maybe isn't intuitive to a lot of people is you think, if I get the best bank possible, that's going to be the best for me.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't want the best bank. You don't want the most well-known one, especially if you're lower mid-market or mid-market. They're not going to provide the same level of service as a bank that kind of focuses in that space. And I've seen a client beg for a bad bank before that then just like put them over the coals with the terms. They never could terminate the engagement. They had to pay the bank every quarter, even the bank didn't do anything, and it ended really, really poorly. And so talk to your lawyer early before you hire a bank, and we'll help you get the right one, and together be a team going into the eventual exit.
Well, Trey, even what you were saying about just validating what the structure and the pricing looks like, even if I bring it to you and it says 3% of enterprise value over a certain amount, and you say, no, that checks out. It's helpful like to get a sanity check on it rather than signing it and like hoping it checks out. And then the second thing I was thinking about is like the tail with the bank. Like that can be a killer one of like, oh, well, the deal didn't go through, but I have to work with this bank for the next 2 years if something else does. Having a good lawyer for that part of the process, like that can save you so many headaches.
That's right. Yeah, and like I've said before, I've seen a bank insist that there is no tail. So if forever, 15 years in the future.
No way. I've never heard that.
I've seen it, and you hope it's something a lot shorter. And look, sometimes the bank has reasons why they want a longer tail than a shorter tail, and they'll provide a good argument, and you'll have to evaluate it. But you really want to know what you're signing and have someone help you think through that, because especially if the process doesn't go well and you think the bank's at fault, like it could be the bank ran a good process, but the market was cold, and then you're okay engaging them again. But if the bank didn't do a good enough job and you want to hire someone differently, it's and you have to pay them 4% even if they don't do anything, that's a pretty tough pill to swallow. We're
going to transition in a sec to talking about like the actual deal when it comes to the buyer, but just like one more astute point on banks that you made, that sometimes you get like starry-eyed, like, I'm making this up. It wasn't actually my scenario, but like, oh, Goldman Sachs wants to work with me, or like JP Morgan wants to work with me. And in the moment, you're like, that's amazing, I'm going to get the A team. But if you're like a smaller company that is not like the whizzes of the world selling to Google, you're probably going to get like their B or C team. And you're probably also not going to get terms that are market for someone who would be like super competitive to work with you.
Yeah, I think that can happen, and it depends. I think a lot of times the first person on the list is the relationship person that you hire, and that's the person you think you're getting. I think this applies for law firms, accounting firms, every kind of industry, right? But like all these big companies, all these big firms have whole teams, and you want to feel confident that you're getting kind of A-level talent all the way down the chain, because the MD at the bank, if they're not paying attention, right, it's like the associate, the VPs, like, you want really strong people at that level, because they're the ones doing a lot of the legwork on these deals.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Listen, being a CFO, it's not always that glamorous. Sometimes I find myself watering the plants and taking out the garbage in the office. And, the best CFOs I know they're true business leaders. They know how to drive growth in heroic fashion. Unfortunately, the status quo of finance makes that really hard, because day to day, we're mostly up to our eyeballs in spreadsheets and receipts. Thankfully, there's a financial provider who has built a solution to match your ambition, Brex. Brex designed a modern corporate card and spend platform that controls spend proactively and automates tedious expense and accounting tasks. Brex frees up CFOs to focus on the high-impact projects that drive growth. The shit that's actually worth your CFO time. So how does Brex work? You can embed your expense policy inside the corporate card to prevent out-of-policy spend before it happens. Receipts and memos are auto-generated, so you always have what you need to close the books fast. Managers get freed up from reviewing, every possible expense under the sun, because in-policy expenses are auto-approved, and AI will flag any exceptions. And all the while, your expense detail is syncing with your ERP, because Brex integrates with almost all of them. I love that, from QuickBooks to NetSuite. It's your time to shine as the strategic growth driver you are, and Brex can make it easy. More than 30,000 companies like DoorDash, Coinbase, and SeatGeek use Brex to make every dollar and every minute count. Join them at brex.com/metrics. That's brex.com/metrics. So if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that I am incredibly passionate about the FP&A space, because that's the route I went to get to CFO. And I want to tell you about a tool that has exploded over the past few years. It's called Aleph. And I remember getting outbounded by them about 2.5 years ago, and I actually took the bait, because they claimed to be able to do a demo with my live data, with me right there on the call. And so I had to see it to believe it. And it was the founder running demos back then. Shout out Albert, hope you're listening. And he connected my NetSuite and built my P&L using their Excel add-in in like 15 minutes. And I was really impressed. Since then, Aleph has gone on to raise money from some of the top VCs out there, and they've built an impressive roster of customers. Many of their customers have been on the podcast, like the CFO at Turo, 8 Sleep, and Zapier. They're all really big champions and supporters of Aleph like me. But it's not just an Excel add-in. Aleph also allows finance teams to work with their live cross-system data using Google Sheets and their web app. And that's cool because it gives teams the option to support a wide range of needs and workflows like budgeting, forecasting, and variance analysis. And speaking of variance analysis, they're doing some really cool things with AI-powered variance analysis. It basically allows you to figure out what's going on and why, and it takes the time that you'd usually spend from hours to minutes. It's really cool. So I highly recommend checking them out and taking them up on that demo or trial, just like I did back in the day. And you can learn more and get started at getaleph.com/run. That is getaleph.com, aleph.com/run. Tell them CJ sent you. All right, I got to get up on my soapbox for a sec here. Everybody's talking about AI powered this and automated that. But here's the thing about revenue recognition. It's not just about moving data around. It's about getting it right, full stop. So RightRev is laser focused on one thing, RevRec that auditors actually trust. See, there's a difference between automating revenue processes and automating revenue recognition correctly. RightRev was actually built by the godfather of RevRec, who understands ASC 606 compliance, audit controls, data validation, and the flexibility needed for complex B2B contracts. We're not trying to be your billing system or your ERP. We're the revenue recognition engine that sits between your contracts and your financials, making sure every dollar is recognized correctly, on time, every time. Companies like Snowflake and Logic Monitor don't just need fast revenue reporting, they need revenue reporting that's audit ready from day one. And that's honestly where RightRev shines. And what I love about RightRev is they're not out there trying to be everything to everyone and just slap some, AI slop on top of it. While everyone is building these massive platforms that do everything in a kind of mediocre fashion, RightRev does one thing exceptionally well. They make sure your revenue recognition is bulletproof. Ready to stop gambling with your RevRec? Visit RightRev.com to see how we make complex revenue simple. That's RightRev.com, where revenue recognition actually works. All right, so this is the meat of the conversation that I'm excited to jam out on. So I just want to riff on some of the mistakes that you've seen or how you've seen deals go sideways or fall apart.
Yeah, it's sad sometimes too. I like to say that none of these are my fault or my mistakes.
You have 100% batting average, don't you?
So I think first of all, one thing about a good lawyer is that most issues with companies, right, can be structured around or solved in a deal. And so, like, for example, especially a few years ago, I felt like every deal I was doing in the software space had sales tax issues. And like,
really,
you get though, for something like this, you get a known liability amount, you can quantify it, and then you can figure out how to kind of allocate the risk and structure around it between the buyer and the seller. And so, a $3 million sales tax bill on a $100 million deal isn't going to kill the deal, right? You can figure out a way to solve it from a way that the buyer and the seller are okay with. I think a lot of issues fall within that bucket. Like, you see contractor and classification issues with employees all the time. Something else that you can usually structure around it and figure out a way to kind of put the risk on the buyer or the seller if you have contractors in Canada that aren't being paid appropriately, or employees misclassified in the US. These are all things that can be solved. I think the things that can really kill a deal, first, I think a lot of these issues are non-legal. It's the buyer, it kind of retrades the price. They start doing their diligence, or they lied and they said they had completed their financial diligence, and then they actually look under the hood and they decide that there's an issue that they want to retrade on price. And so that happens. And, without getting into the weeds, you can structure processes to hopefully avoid that by, keeping deal heat on the buyer. But from a legal side, I would say the kind of two big issues that can kill deals. First is if your company doesn't own the IP that it says it owns in the tech space. We see this sometimes. If you don't own critical IP and the buyer is buying you for that IP, like, for example, I've seen where a company had a strategic partner as his first client, and they developed their software for that client basically, but did not own the resulting IP like they thought they did. Their first customer effectively owned their IP, and they went to go sell to a competitor of their first customer. And unsurprisingly, that first customer wasn't going to play ball. Like, that will kill a deal. And so making sure you own your IP is maybe point one. And then point two, I would say, is if there's a kind of co-founder issues that aren't solved appropriately, where one founder walks away and they arguably still own a huge chunk of the equity, or they never assigned their founder IP to the company, and now the remaining founder and the departed founder aren't on good terms anymore, and you go to sell, and the buyer looks and says, hey, I think this other guy or gal might own a huge chunk of this company or have rights that we need them, and that gives that person a lot of leverage to exert value.
Okay, now we're cooking, baby. We're cooking with gas. So to go back, 2 common solvable issues you flagged: sales tax and contractors, right?
Yeah.
Maybe just give like a blurb on sales tax. Where does that stem from? Is it unpaid sales tax?
Yeah, unpaid sales tax. I think companies are doing a better job of this now, but you're selling to customers in certain states, and you're not collecting sales taxes in those states.
It's actually pretty easy to mess this up. Just for all the operators out there, like, I empathize with you. There are 50 states, and sometimes you expand pretty quickly, and you trigger nexus because you hired somebody there, not because of the sales amount. But that's a hairy one.
And it's like it's probably the case that the state isn't going to come in and knock on your door for payment. But when a buyer hires a Deloitte or a KPMG or whoever to come and review tax diligence, and they find actual liability, that buyer is going to tell you that this is something that's owed and that they want to get paid for it. And it's hard to then say, hey, no, we don't want to take a purchase price deduction, or we don't want to do anything here, because you should have paid it at the time.
But it technically is a liability.
It is a liability.
All right. And second one, contractors. This one's a different bag of burritos.
Yeah. And I think this is another thing that's become more difficult. And there's obviously really good companies out there that help you with this, like hiring throughout the world. But with the rise in remote companies, and with people not wanting to be limited by only hiring in the US, you start hiring employees throughout the world, or in states throughout the US, and every jurisdiction has its own rules around how to classify employees, how to classify contractors, and then payment obligations to these people. And again, unlikely to be an issue often when you're just operating, but especially when a bigger fish comes in to buy a smaller company, they're going to identify these issues and know they have to correct them. And because they're probably going to want to correct them, there's going to be the question of like how that cost is allocated in the deal.
Yeah, it's easier with companies like Deal and Remote, who will help you hire and also like keep your books in order. But at the same time, it is an operational complexity for whoever's acquiring you. Like, oh, do I really want employees in Portugal? Do I really want employees in Ukraine? So there's kind of like the liability piece. And then there's also like, oh, so we're going to have to integrate, and you have this dependency that may have like a macro angle that we didn't anticipate before.
Yeah, and does the acquirer want to continue using Deal, for example, or do they have their own existing like framework where they're going to have to move the employees to, and like how the benefit plans work if the company's always offered options to their employees, but they've never had someone in Portugal before, for example, and now they have to figure out what it means to issue options in Portugal. It's going to be really complicated for buyers.
Cool. So sales tax and contractors, both not something you want to do on a Friday afternoon, but solvable.
Yeah.
Let's get into the other two that often do bring about retrades in price, which is not what you want. So the first one around IP, I actually wasn't aware that was like as big of an issue. Does that happen a lot where people say they own something they don't?
I think most of the time you don't screw this up, because every startup lawyer worth their salt is making sure from day one that you're not screwing this up, right? And I also think that for most types of products, like if you're developing something internally and a third party doesn't really have a right to it, it's not as much of a risk. Like what you do see is you see early employees or contractors not sign IP assignments.
Yes, I've had that happen.
You've had that, yeah. And so there, it's like the fix is easy, right? It's go get those people to sign something. So it's if the most critical piece of code was written by someone that never was a contractor in a different country, never signed something, that person, you hope those type of people will then sign something in the future, and especially if they just get some payment to do so. I'd say that type of issue is solvable, but it happens all the time, and it's very, very solvable. It's really if a third party, like a customer or you spun out of university, like kind of these other like non-individual people that might have rights to the IP because it was created utilizing this customer's money in some prepaid agreement, or utilizing the university, and it wasn't handled appropriately.
Cool. And then the last one here, co-founder issues. That's That's a complicated one because a lot of startups, I mean, if say it takes you 10 years to sell, you may not have the same people in the car that you started with.
That's right. And I mean, you hear stories too, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg that, watch the social network, and you see how this played out in real life from some big companies. So, I mean, doing this correctly from day one is obviously the easiest and the cheapest way to avoid an issue in the exit. And the common way that is you have all the founders subject to vesting with their stock, and you ensure that they assign all initial IP into the company. And so if one of the founders leaves, some of their stock is repurchased, and there's no questions around like the IP they created being owned by the company. But again, a lot of startups are scrappy. They're not focused on these type of issues when they're trying to create a product. And even university students in a basement, right, that like aren't focused on this and don't anticipate issues because everyone's best buds at day one. And if it isn't done correctly at the exit, it can be a big headache for a company selling.
That's some sage advice. I want to move on to what you've called the most litigated part of M&A deals. Earnouts, baby.
Yeah. Earnouts. And I think this is good for your audience too, because it's one where I think like a CFO particularly can play a big part in helping.
And it's also relevant to the audience from like a functional area of expertise, but also personally, if I'm bringing it back to like people involved in it.
Yeah, that's true. Because a lot of times management is the one, the earnouts can be set up such that management as opposed to the entire company benefits from them. That is uncommon. Yeah, so I mean, I think probably your whole audience knows what earnout is, but just to state it in case not, it's a portion of the deal payment that isn't paid at the closing, but is paid post-closing based upon the achievement of some milestone. Sometimes this is non-financial, so it's like if a drug makes it to a certain stage of development, or if some product is created. But most of the time in businesses that I deal with, it's tied to some like financial metric, and if that metric is achieved, then the earnout is paid. So as you were saying, CJ, like these are litigated all the time, and it's very, very common, especially right now. We're seeing tons of lawsuits. And so business people and the buyers and sellers love this, love earnouts on paper because it's like a way to bridge a valuation gap. I've heard you talk about this on the podcast before, right? But you go to market and you're trying to sell a company, and you have financial projections which are very rosy and are maybe different than the ones that are your own internal projections, right? And so the buyer sees these great projections and they expect that you hit these. And so they say, here's the earnout tied to those projections. And that's great if you hit it, but if you don't, it's not great if you're not paid that money. And so it's a tool that can bridge a valuation gap, but presents some risk. I would say maybe a few points here that would be helpful. The first is, what type of metrics are you using? You see, from my perspective, to the extent that you move away from pure revenue into anything else, it starts getting more muddied and there's more room for dispute. And so, like, for example, you see ARR earnouts. Like, how do you measure ARR, right? It's a non-GAAP metric. There's a bunch of different ways to measure it. And you talked about this on the podcast before, but like, if you have an ARR earnout, like the definition of ARR becomes incredibly important that you need to like think through in the deal. Revenue, anything top line is easy because the buyer has kind of a lot of control post deal. And so if they have ability to shove expenses into the earnout determination too, like what expenses are associated with the business post-closing that weren't pre-closing, like that can become murky. And so revenue is maybe the easiest and most objective, but it's not always what the parties want. So thinking through that metric, I think is one big point. The second, just so your kind of audience is aware, it's pretty common for the buyer to have a lot of discretion in how to operate the company post-closing. And I think this is something that surprises people. Like, you think if there's an earnout, like the seller side and the buyer side are kind of jointly going to operate the business, but most buyers will not accept a lot of their discretion limited by the seller side. And so you have to think through these earnout structures in light of the fact that the buyer is probably going to have a lot of ability to set budgets, to set hiring and firing, control kind of expenses associated with the business. And because of that, like, it's not as if your small team or scrappy team before is going to be able to do everything. Decisions are going to go through the buyer. You're not going to be able to be as flexible as you were before potentially. And that could affect your ability to hit the milestones.
That was so well said. I had a friend who sold his media business to a larger media business. So this is a little bit outside the world of SaaS, but just to give another example. Mm-hmm. And once he got there, he had this really healthy earnout that was predicated on the ad sales for his newsletter. And then the buyer staffed no salespeople against it to sell the ads. So in that instance, at least the metric was like very clean. It wasn't like, he was linked to profitability or something, or it was ARR, and it's like, well, how do you define ARR? It was pretty obvious. Like, it's just how much he booked in revenue against his show, but he had no supporting resources to help. So like when the rubber hit the road, he felt like he was helpless.
Yeah, and like you can try to structure around this, right? So it's like I've seen and often won this point where you require a certain level of like minimum budgetary investment into the business. Like that's something you can try to win. I'd say like when you're thinking about this, if you're selling to a private equity firm where you're the platform deal, so that you're the PE firm's first company, right? It's a lot easier to kind of restrain the PE firm because basically everyone at the company is people that are at the selling business. If you're selling to a massive tech acquirer that you're just this tiny fraction of the overall business, it's going to be a lot harder to get those type of like mandatory restrictions or investments that you might want for the earnout to be hit.
And this is where too, as a listener, you may start thinking, well, what plan do I try to sell the company using? Because you have your board plan, right? Which is usually internally what your bonuses are predicated against. You have the sales team plan, which is overassigned because you have big deal risk, you have people quitting. You need to make sure you de-risk the company hitting its goals. And then you have like a fundraising plan that you have in the back of your head, which is like rosy. And of course, in year 5, you always hit 100 million in revenue by then, right? Hockey stick growth. The plan that you go to sell the company, this is where it gets a little dicey because you don't want to use a downside plan that you would necessarily give to a lender, right? That's like, so you don't breach covenants. It has to be like that. We could hit this plan with our eyes closed, but you also don't want to use your fundraise plan or the sales team plan that's too rosy, because if during diligence you start to fall off of those numbers you gave them, then they may use that as an opportunity to retrade on price. And then on top of that, once you get there, if it's like an 18-month, 2-year earnout, you're still gonna have to hit those numbers that you sold the company on. So bridging that gap in valuation may not have been worth it.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, I think trying to in your process force a buyer to at least on paper not do an earnout can be advantageous, and then you think of the earnout maybe internally as almost like extra sauce. Like that's not the deal price. That's like almost like an extra thing that we get, and not thinking of it like cash. I think if you frame your mind that way,
I love that,
you'll be happier. But yeah, I mean, look, it's hard to not give the rosy projections, right? You're trying to maximize price. To your point, though, I think it's a great point about if you don't hit projections during the deal process.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, because another thing I would say is almost every deal, and this is maybe, I say this all the time, I think sometimes people are annoyed when I say it, but like I don't see deals hit timelines that are the aspirational timelines the majority of the time. Paradoxically, some of the largest deals where you have 900 lawyers and 500 bankers on them, like those maybe stay on time, but mid-market deals often do not close when you want them to close. They get delayed, usually because of the buyer, but sometimes because it's just so much work for the seller. There's so much to do. And if that deal process extends and you have a forecast and you're not hitting your own metrics within the forecast that you've given to the buyer, at that point too, the buyer has so much leverage because you've been in this process for a long time. Your employees are starting to find out about the deal. You're tired. You don't want to sell to a buyer at this point because you've just so overworked, you're ready to get paid, and you see dollar signs potentially, but you've not hit your numbers. Like it's an easy tool for a buyer to use to retrade on price. And so, certainly make sure you hit your numbers if possible during the period that the deal is being evaluated.
And deal fatigue is a real thing. Like the longer it drags on, the more that you start to not mentally check out, but transition to the next chapter. And like you said, if employees start to find out about it, it's like, okay, how do I manage this communication internally? And then the buyer, like, I don't want to say everybody's, acting in a nefarious way or anything, but like they have all the leverage. If they want to retrade on price by 5%, they're kind of testing. I don't know. Are they going to bail from this?
Yeah, I mean, and it's also customers too. Look, sometimes it's bad for a buyer if the deal leaks. It could be for whatever reason it can be really bad for a buyer too. But I would say more common, it's worse for the seller if your customer base starts to understand that you might be going through a sales process, particularly if the buyer is maybe competitive with some of the customers of the seller, and so leaks happen. So it's hard to be fully protected against them and even figure out sometimes where the leak came from. You might have an idea, but you might not have like full proof. So yeah, be prepared for that. And to your point on the deal fatigue, like it is every deal, it feels like people get deal fatigue. And so like if you go into the mindset that it's going to be quick and easy, I think sometimes that will lead to the most deal fatigue. Go into the mindset that it's going to be a lot of work, but after it's over, you'll be popping champagne bottles and celebrating, and you'll be very happy.
So earnouts, what's the TLDR on it? What's the final takeaway that you think people listening should capture?
Yeah, I would say think about it as extra money and not as kind of core price. Be really thoughtful about what your team is going to need post-closing to hit it in light of the fact that you won't have control over the business, and try to make the metrics as clear as possible such that a buyer can't play around with it.
Yeah, on that last point, this is the time for footnotes. Be extremely clear on what a customer is, what revenue means, because you don't want to be debating that down the line.
Yeah, and maybe more to that point, sometimes people say, I don't want to read the legal work. That's all for the lawyers. I read the contract that your lawyer is drafting over these provisions, because I know what revenue is, but if there's a revenue definition in the agreement, right? You want to make sure you read that. If there's an AR definition, you want to make sure you read it. Oh
yeah.
Dive into the legal language, which can be tough at times when there's deal fatigue and you're tired, but especially the earnout section, the financial definitions of the agreement. These are kind of joint collaborations between lawyers and our clients to make sure we all do it correctly.
Yeah, only you truly know how you calculated ARR in that one conference room back in December when you were making the plan. So Trey's a smart guy, but double check it.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to talk about the CFO mentality during the deal process. What are some tips and mindsets that they should have for this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, thinking in a deal, your CEO has the hardest job in the world, I would say, and then the CFO probably has the second hardest job. So it's a ton of work, as I've kind of already said. So you're kind of the workhorse, particularly in companies where there isn't a legal function, which is a lot of our clients. You're kind of both wearing the CFO hat, operating the business hat, and almost serving as a legal main point of contact. And so it's a ton of things to be prepared for. I would say how to think about the deal from your own personal perspective. This is something that, I advise companies, right? And I don't typically advise the CFO personally, but it's something to think about, how, if you're kind of the non-founder employee, what does the deal mean for you? Because at the end of the day, right, we want the company to succeed, but we also want to personally do well in these type of transactions. A few points there. The first is, think about what your role is going to be post-closing. If you have a role, often a CFO, kind of like a general counsel, there isn't a role, especially if it's a big acquirer that's buying you. So be prepared that you might have a short transition period, or you might be terminated right after closing. And how does that kind of affect your overall assessment of what it means the deal means to you, particularly if you're doing a ton of work? I would say that, what's your compensation in the deal? If you're the CFO, you probably have a pretty good idea of the cap table and what you're going to be making. I would say that a lot of clients I work with, the CEOs are always thinking about their employees. They're not just trying to maximize their own profit. They're very focused on they're making sure their whole employee base is well taken care of. And that might be based upon prior option awards. It could be that everyone's just doing really well in the deal because the company has given so much equity to people. But you often also see transaction bonuses or kind of retention equity in the buyer. You see companies and CEOs figure out ways to ensure that this deal is good for their employees. And if you're a CFO and you're getting terminated when the deal closes, maybe it's the case that your options are enough, but if they're not accelerating and you're doing all the work, maybe your CEO does this anyways and gives you extra bonus. Maybe it's something to talk about if you're working 90-hour weeks for 5 months before this happens. So I would say don't be afraid to have that conversation about what the deal means to you personally, particularly if you're not staying on, because there are ways to kind of provide additional compensation, and that happens somewhat frequently.
Trey, is there a best time to negotiate what the deal means to you? If you think about the spectrum of a deal life cycle, at what point should the CFO be having that conversation if they were to maximize leverage?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because in one way, you get options and those are supposed to award you on the exit. And so I can see a lot of CEOs saying, hey, this is what the options are for. This is part of your job description. And if you went too early to try to get more money for yourself in a deal, like just being like, no, this is too early. I do because I see, like, in my experience, CEOs tend to do a good job of taking care of people who kind of slaved away on deals. I do see kind of towards the end of the process, people getting like large awards quite frequently. But if you wait towards the end, you don't, like, this is kind of at the generosity of the board and of the CEO. And so you don't necessarily have like the hold up value at that point. So, I mean, like, I don't think, your CFO should be maybe, holding kind of companies hostage right before sales processes. Like, if you're underpaid and you know that your options aren't going to accelerate, like, yeah, have that conversation. But what I think would mostly happen is your CEO is going to tell you, like, no, you're already overcompensated.
Yeah.
Or they're going to say, I'll take care of you. And then you kind of have to say, do you trust them or not to do something like accelerate your equity?
Yeah. Because the CFO has a fiduciary responsibility to get the deal done. And then on a personal level, they're also like, well, I want to make sure that if I get canned after this and I don't have like a double trigger, I'm not going to get accelerated. I do have enough to take me to the next chapter in my life.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it can be tricky. And again, like, another thing, like, your lawyer, right? Like, if I'm the company's lawyer, like, I'm not the CFO's lawyer, or not even the CEO's lawyer, but I'm the company's lawyer. And so, I would say most of the time, if you're the CFO, you're not engaging your own counsel. But if it's so much money at stake, feel free to, I would say a lot of times CEOs too and companies would be annoyed if kind of that next tier employee kind of starts holding up the deal. You want people that are going to kind of get the deal over the line. But if it's enough money at stake, like, you should always feel comfortable, like, calling up someone who actually represents you and talking about what it means for you, particularly if you don't know if you're going to be fired or not post deal, and compensation is tied to post deal activities.
Yeah. And I have to thank you because you were very helpful to me. I could call you up and, hey, man, can you just explain what this means to me? Like, I need to understand as a CFO, but I also need to understand, like, what happens to me after in this. But to your point, it sounds like it is okay at some points to hire your own counsel.
Yeah, and I think even in deals, you have company counsel, but, like, what is a company? Like, there are investors, there's management, there's employees, right? And, like, there is kind of no single person as a company. So as companies counsel, like, you end up giving advice to stockholders, to management, and that's common. But I think, that only is an issue where there's a huge disconnect between what, the quote unquote company wants and what an individual stockholder wants, or what a management person wants. So it could be the case that, like, company counsel can be helpful to employees, but particularly if there's a disconnect where, like, the CEO doesn't want to pay you more, or you're being fired and everyone else isn't, or even sometimes in deals the stockholders and the CEO and the board, or the stockholders and management are opposed to each other, where the stockholders don't think they're getting paid enough and management doesn't think they're getting paid enough. And so in those situations, you do see sometimes, like, individual players within the company get their own counsel, why, like, company counsel kind of help quarterbacks everyone's input.
Because there are certain games to be played. Sometimes as a CFO, you actually don't want to go on to the next company because maybe it's a bigger one and you say, listen, I'm a startup person by nature. I want to, like, take my chips off the table here and go play another game. After there's a successful exit, I'll make sure it gets through. But then if you're the CEO, you may have an earnout where you're going to have to stay for 2 years. And you should also be thinking about, well, what's my new salary going to be? You may get a raise. You may actually get less money than before because they're going to benchmark you against now like a GM within their company after you're acquired.
Yeah, that's right. And you're the CEO too. You may be tired, and you may even have an earnout that might be small, but you made enough money that you actually don't want to stay. And so you have to act like, sometimes, and I think buyers, like, when I represent buyers, we're always thinking about, like, how do we ensure that the incentive package, like, actually makes people want to stay, and how do we ensure that this transaction is going to be successful? And buyers are always thinking about that. But I mean, sometimes CEOs they want to get out too. And because, and maybe something else to add, like non-competes, we haven't talked about that yet, but different buyers have different views of, like, what group of people should sign non-competes. And it's, if a CEO founder, it's very common for them to sign a 3 to 5 year non-compete. But once you start going down the chain, it becomes, if you're making $500,000, it's not fair to sign up to a 5 year non-compete. Most, I would say, particularly representing the seller, but some buyers want some very burdensome non-competes, even from kind of the non-essential people, and navigating that is tricky.
I want to get back to non-competes in a second. I also want to ask you non-solicits because that one always confuses me.
Yeah.
But just a couple other tips for CFOs during the deal process. Can you just speak to having a good understanding of working capital fluctuations and why that's important?
Yeah, that's a good question. So working capital, I won't go like too technical into it, but it's dollars in, dollars out for a deal. So basically a target working capital set based upon where working capital is expected to be as of closing. And depending if it's above or below, depends if there's a purchase price increase or decrease. And so there's gonna be a lot of gamesmanship of like how that is set. Using historical numbers, are you using a forecasted number based upon where you anticipate working capital be as of closing? Then another thing is like lawyers think about working capital based upon how the agreement reads, whereas maybe the CFOs think about it in a more traditional sense. So just for example, like cash is not a working capital asset in most purchase agreements, but when you think about working capital from like a operational perspective, you're including your cash. And so understanding how that definition ties into the purchase agreement definition is kind of critical. And then setting a number where you know you're not going to get a big negative purchase price swing is really important.
Yeah, because most deals are done on a cashless, debt-free basis, right?
That's right. And so, and that leads to another point, which is like, what is debt? Like in a traditional sense, debt is debt, but in a contract, in a purchase agreement contract, a whole bunch of things can be debt, which reduce the purchase price. And
deferred revenue.
Deferred revenue is a big one. You know, how much, if any of it, is debt, and so there's basically a spectrum where you, as a seller, you want to not have stuff in debt. And then if it's in working capital, you want it to be set in such a way that it doesn't reduce the purchase price. So if it's a liability, you want it to effectively reduce that target working capital. And so you're not taking a purchase price deduction for those liabilities. So there's a long way of saying it's kind of technical, but debt, working capital, and just understanding where these numbers will all be as of closing all tie in together. And it's critical for CFOs to have a good understanding of that.
It's very relevant and important, but it's less impactful if you're like a tech business versus like a company that sells stuff in the real world. So my online friend, Secret CFO, who writes a great newsletter, he gives the example of like a Halloween costume store. And like if you were selling that business with the huge seasonal fluctuation and right before the deal goes through, the owner goes and like liquidates all the Halloween costume inventory, and then they take the company and they can't do anything with it like right before the season starts. Like that's a real world implication of this.
Yeah, absolutely. It is not as important in most tech companies, but even, sometimes like pass-through revenues and things like that, there can be some weird mismatches of like when you pay your receivables versus your payables. And like, so it's hopefully not a huge fluctuation, but still something important to kind of focus in on, especially since it's just a dollar in, dollar out at the end of the day.
And it can get contentious if you're a enterprise software company who has like 3-year contracts, and then you start to go back and forth on like, well, should it be deducted the full deal amount in year 2 because you haven't given it to them yet? Or should it just be like times the cost of goods sold, your gross margin to serve the customer? Like, I'm sure you've seen stuff go back and forth on that too.
All these variations, all these variations and more really. It's at the end of the day, it's just a dollar, right? So it's really a price adjustment. Then people try to make like logical arguments for why their point is better than the other side's point, but like it is just a dollar point. Like it is purchase price, how you characterize it or not.
It is funny. At the end of the day, you're just arguing over who gets that dollar, and you're just putting it behind some definition that you're pushing.
That's right. and that can help you feel better if you win or lose the point, right? You're like, oh, we didn't actually reduce the purchase price because this should always be characterized this way, but it really is just purchase price.
There is some weird ego in that. Like, oh no, I won that point about the peg.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of ego and a lot of M&A negotiation. Like, we're going to give this point because we get, it's like you want to always feel like you won at the end of the day. And I think that's good, right? Like you want to psychologically feel like everyone should be happy when the deal ends. But that is part of these processes.
But the other piece of that you can take, like the Jedi mind trick, is like act like it's important to you and it's not really important to you, and you give it to them as a win. And it was like a small point of consideration. Yeah,
that happens every deal. So, and it's hard to know, exactly what the other side cares the most about, because there is posturing and bluffing and things like that.
All right, Trey, non-competes, how do those usually work? Because that can be actually very meaningful to an employee who may need to go work somewhere else and they only know a certain sector.
Yeah, I'd say the first thing I would say is particularly, people in states like California where employment non-competes aren't enforceable, you might come into the mindset with like, I live in this state, like I can't be subject to non-compete. That's not the case in an M&A deal. In an M&A deal, if there's enough consideration being paid to a person, that person can be actually bound by a sale of business non-compete. And so not every buyer like philosophically believes in these, but a lot do. And so I would say it's very common for the CEO of founders who are receiving like very significant proceeds to sign up somewhere between like 3 and 5 years, depending on how much money that they're usually receiving. Like if it's like truly life-changing money, then like a 5-year non-compete shouldn't really be that objectionable. Once you start kind of going down the compensation route, it maybe goes down to 3 years. And these are usually tied to the business that's being sold. It can be a bit negotiated, but it shouldn't be like, it should really be more or less like, what is the business being sold? What is that doing? And then maybe what that business is planning to do. And that should be kind of the scope of this non-compete. For the non-founder employees, it is not uncommon for certain buyers to also request non-competes from those people. And usually people think about it based upon like how much money they're receiving. Like one buyer might say, if you're receiving over $1 million, I'm going to sign you up to X level of restriction. And I think at a deal level, this presents some deal risk because sellers then have to, if they agree to this construct, go and get individual employees to agree to this in order for the deal to happen. And then from a personal level, of course, like you as the person being asked to sign this, like you might not have counsel, you probably don't, and this is a pretty big restriction. And so I think that the key things to think about are like, what am I receiving? And then, what is my skill set? Like, is it actually limited to this field? And if it isn't, if you're a CFO and you can be a CFO and, in any other kind of industry, but you just this tiny segment that you can't be, it probably isn't that restrictive. But if the definition, if the company you're working for is a broad enough business, the definition is drafted very broadly, and your skill set is really limited to this one area, and you're not receiving a lot of money, then that non-compete can be very burdensome for you.
Like, to give you an example of where, in my opinion, it would be unfair, like if they tried to slap a non-compete on like a customer support manager who's making $100,000 and they can no longer work in like anything in auto anymore. Yeah. Like to me, and they're only receiving like a $50,000 payout. Like they're not giving that person enough runway or enough benefit to lock them up and make it so they can't work anymore.
Yeah, I completely agree. And some states have laws where like, it has to be at a certain level for it to be enforceable, but not every state does. And so it's like a state by state analysis, whether that's even enforceable. I think the other thing to be prepared for is often a buyer who's giving you new equity might try to, especially more in, I would say, the PE context than like the tech acquirer context, but might try to give you new equity that has strings attached where you could be not like be signing a non-compete because you're getting ownership in a new company. And so there's multiple ways that people can try to lock up employees into non-competes that they might not be prepared for.
Yeah, there may be a transaction bonus actually. In order to accept it, you have to say no liabilities or claims against the company. And I also won't work in this industry. And you have to read the fine print.
Yeah, and that's very common. Like the release is a really common one. And like this is one where I think as an employee, like if you're being asked to release claims against the company, like that's fair if you're getting paid cash. So I like as a company counsel would like hope my employee base would be fine saying, hey, like I'm not trying to get paid a bunch of money and then turn around and sue the next day.
And sue you, yeah. That would be kind of shady.
Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, the non-compete is one where it may, each person has a different situation where it, that how difficult that is depends on that person.
And non-solicit, so not everybody sticks around after, but like you may want to get the band back together in a while. What's your opinion on non-solicits?
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier argument for a buyer to win that you shouldn't be allowed to solicit the employee base of a company that you're buying because often the value in what you're buying is the employees, and so it's very common to see a non-solicit and like properly defined. I think fair as long as it's properly scoped. I think what can be murky is sometimes people say non-solicit, but it's really a customer or a vendor or supplier non-solicit, which is like a backdoor non-compete, and so sometimes you want to be careful that a true employee non-solicit, like I won't get the team back together a year later, to me, pretty reasonable request in a lot of deals. But, I can't go solicit a customer if you that's kind of a non-compete. So you have to be careful about those.
All right. One more for you. 280G. This was a new one for me. This one took me a really long time to wrap my head around.
Yeah. And it's like, how much time does your audience have to be bored by this IRS code? I just say at a high level, if you're receiving a bunch of compensation in a deal, in order to not have some really bad tax consequences personally, like a 20% penalty tax, the stockholders of a company have to approve your excess payment, your called golden parachute payment, basically. And it's counterintuitive what would count. You might not think you're receiving enough money for this to count, but the way the math works out, you often have to go through this process. And what makes it sometimes concerning for people is that your compensation is distributed to the entire stockholder base.
Yeah, it's publicized.
It's publicized to the entire stockholder base, not option holders, but stockholders. But that just means that a lot of people will get your compensation. So that can be scary. And then theoretically, you could lose out on the compensation if the stockholders don't approve these payments. And so you're concerned that you're going to lose money. I would say I sympathize with people that are afraid about their compensation being shared, but this is a common thing in deals. And it kind of is what it is. And it's drafted in such a way that it isn't hopefully not too scary for you. But stockholders almost always approve these packages. And so don't be too concerned that you're going to lose money. Your stockholder base should approve these in almost every situation.
And I think it was the term golden parachute when I saw it for the first time that threw me off. I was like, isn't this for if Jamie Dimon leaves JP Morgan? Why am I seeing this on a piece of paper?
I know it's a lot of work too for something that's become very formulaic in M&A deals, and a lot of disclosure to you don't want out there for something that is almost always approved.
Yeah, and I'm not a tax attorney, but I feel like I know more than I should about alternative minimum tax and all the other sorts of tax, potholes you can step in when you're in tech. And the 280G thing, I was like, holy shit! So if I get this wrong, it's 20% extra tax. Trey, help me here.
Huge. Yeah, it's huge if it happens. It's a headache, and there's a lot of information that goes into getting that analysis prepared, which CFOs are often the ones pulling together. So it's a lot of work, but it's not as scary as you think. Is I think the high level takeaway I would say.
Trey, this has been a blast. Gearing towards a close here, I'd love to have you back on to do a buy side M&A at some point. We can split them into part 1 and part 2, if that's cool. And any closing words for the folks just in your experience trying to do these deals and going through all the stress side by side with CFOs like me?
Well, maybe I would just first say, this has been geared for the sell side. So if I'm ever on the buy side, and I'm across from anyone listening, disregard everything I said. It's not.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
Whatever position I'm taking on the buy side is the right way.
He's just as good as at the other position, folks.
I think at a high level, these processes are a ton of work. It's particularly for your founding team, it is. Often your retirement, maybe generational wealth for your family, the stakes are really high, and it deserves that level of seriousness. But at the same time, get a team in place from your bankers, your lawyers, your internal team that will help you navigate this. Try to make it as enjoyable as possible. It's going to be a lot of work, but these can be very rewarding experiences. And certainly as a lawyer, try to help you, navigate the business and legal issues throughout the whole process as well as I can, and be kind of an ally throughout that. But they're fun. I enjoy M&A. I think it's an exciting thing to do. And you go through them and you're kind of almost like a sporting event that you're this was amazing. This was exciting. This was I won a game, and you're celebrating at the end of it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining me, and thanks for all the help.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great to be on, and I'm sure we'll talk soon, CJ.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.